Let me start this morning by asking a question. Show of hands, how many of you are happy with where you are Jewishly? Okay. Now a show of hands, how many of you are not quite happy with where you are Jewishly? Okay. How many of you intentionally did not raise your hands thinking that this might be a trick question? A couple, good. So let me be clear from the outset. I'm speaking to a room filled with people who decided to come to shul on Shabbat morning. But I also want to be clear that the ikar, that the essence of this little bissel of Torah this morning is directed to you, to the shul goers, the ones who are actively living a life of religious Judaism in one way or another. And of course, in good Jewish fashion, my response to my initial question is to applaud those of you who are happy with where you are Jewishly, and for those of you who aren't happy with where you are Jewishly, to applaud you. Your Judaism, wherever it is, whether you have been a Shomer Shabbat, Shomer Mitzvot, Yid from your Cheder days, or whether you're just now learning the Aleph Bet and this is your first time in shul since the high holidays, your Judaism is beautiful, and it's good, and it's right, and it deserves to be celebrated. And, not but, and, it's also time to move. And I'm not using this time this morning to guilt all of us into taking on more mitzvot, though I'm not encouraging that as an aside. The movement I'm talking about, this need to move, is one that goes deeper than ritual and physical commitment. It's a movement of the neshama, it's a movement of our souls that reflects on the idea echoed in our Parashat this week that we are not called Yaakov. We are not called Jacob. We're called Yisrael. And we have a duty, we have an obligation to embody that name and to wrestle with God. And so we are required to move. And we are required to move in the ways that are the most intimate and simultaneously the most frightening. Not just in our practice, not just in our expression of our Judaism, but in our theology, in our relationship with God, in our learning about who we are, what we are, and why we are. That requires something different from us than lighting Shabbat candles or saying Tilat Yadayim before we eat some bread. It requires us to reject complacency and to come face to face with a religion and a tradition that can sometimes be painful and can sometimes be hurtful and can sometimes be utterly confusing, and then we have to approach that and we have to wrestle. Torah is everything. It is the expanse of all that we know and can know about our relationships with one another and with God, and therefore, by definition, when we thrust our hands into the unknown, into the stuff of Torah searching for diamonds, we also have to prepare ourselves for the inevitable truth that we will, no doubt, cut our hands on some broken glass along the way. But the movement, the wrestling, is about acknowledging that that broken glass is also a part of Torah. It's not a fun part. It's not an easy part, but it's still part. So let me stop speaking in abstractions. You'll have to forgive me. We rabbis love metaphors. Our Torah, both the written Torah and the oral Torah, and therefore our Judaism, is filled with the things that we laud and uphold, ideas, stories, ethics, and ideals for which we raise the banner and sound the shofar so that the world can see just how lovely our tents are. Our Torah is filled with love, with family and friendship, with lessons of mindfulness, grace, commitment. And our Torah also has within it anger, jealousy, violence, Our Torah has a problematic understanding of women, of non-Jews, of same-sex intimacy, and of certain nations and peoples. Our Torah is kind, compassionate, and just. It is also cruel, callous, and impatient. And here we are as its inheritors, tasked with carrying on the chiyuv, carrying on the charge of doing what we have always done and wrestling. But in order for us to take on the sacred task, we have to recognize that wrestling is not like boxing. You'll excuse me as I slip into metaphors again. We don't get to attack and then defend from afar, making jabs and then retreating. In other words, we don't get to take what we like, punch out the stuff that we don't, and carve out a Judaism that belongs just to us. Our own special Torah that fits our worldview. There's no Yoni's Torah. There's no Steve's Torah. There's no Larry's Torah. That doesn't exist. There is only Torah. In rabbinical school, I had a powerful moment with a colleague of mine who is a serious student and scholar and now a rabbi, a beautiful human being with a beautiful neshama, who is gay and was studying the rules, the laws, saying a man should not lie with another man. And I came up to him and he had a tear in his eye while he was studying and learning. And I asked him, why are you doing this? This is antiquated, this is old, we don't have to do this, we can take this part out, we can understand that our Torah isn't perfect and that sometimes there are parts where we can just remove and we can move on. And he said, Yoni, absolutely not. We don't have that privilege. If I'm going to say that this Torah is true and pure and good and holy, then I have to take it. All of it. All of it. Including the painful parts. Including the parts that really hurt me to my core. But this is Torah. And it's there. Wrestling, as Yaakov Avinu, as our father Jacob shows us, is messy. It's a tangling of limbs, a blurring together of bodies where it's hard to tell where one person stops and another person begins. And so while it feels violent, aggressive, hostile, it is also undeniably intimate. A face-to-face altercation that even in its most bitter moments is still deeply personal and forces both parties to learn one another. Strengths, weaknesses, every muscle, every joint, every inch of skin. And sometimes we have the upper hand, or at least we feel like we have the upper hand, where we have our Judaism in an armbar and a chokehold, where we have it subdued, and we can catch our breath and feel good about where we've been and where we are. Feel good about my Judaism. And other times, we can feel pinned down, hopeless, stuck under the weight of this tradition, this peoplehood, exhausted, and ready to tap out. But no matter where we are, we have to move. We have to. Because we made a promise at the base of Sinai that we would. And so here is my charge to you this morning, to me this morning, to all of us this morning. Let's move. This week, as we get closer to the lights of Hanukkah and to a time of year when it's easy to stay put, to hibernate, to store up our winter warmth, let's each find an aspect of our Jewish journey. Our relationship with halakha, our frustration with God, our sadness at our Parashat this week with the rape of Dinah, the revenge of her brothers, the spurning of Esau by Jacob, the sacrifice of Isaac, the economic abuse of kosher food vendors, the treatment of kosher slaughtered animals, the biblical system of slavery, the culture of Jewish guilt, the gendered and often sexist language of liturgy and text. Whatever it might be, whatever it is, let's wrestle with the fact that it's there. And that it too is Torah. that we can't throw it away, even if it feels like doing so would be much easier than grabbing onto it and letting it blur into the essence of who we are. So let me say again, your Judaism, wherever it is beautiful. It's right. It's good. And I'm proud of you for the Jews that you are and for the Judaism that you're living. And, not but, and, it's time to move. It's time to keep going. The diamonds are too precious to leave untouched while we keep our distance worried about the broken glass. Our hands need to get some cuts. Our bodies need to get battered and bruised, because that's what it means to wrestle. And wrestlers are who we promised that we would be. Shabbat Shalom.